How about that? It's good to see you again today, and I'm back to wreak havoc on the devil's kingdom if I can. My topic this session is Christian ethics in reporting the Arab-Israeli conflict. The handout is for tomorrow. I'm sorry about that, Paul. The handout is for tomorrow, not today.
Oh, it's not today.
It's not today.
Are you going to reverse?
Tomorrow I'm going to do Psalm 89 and the Kings of Israel. That's what that handout is for. Now, if you think you can keep it and bring it back with you and not lose it, you can do it. My bad. The picture there is a picture of missiles coming out of Gaza into Israel. Well, I have it turned on here, so the guys in the back maybe need to punch it up. How's that?
Now you're on.
Hopefully, is that good? No. Well, I have these big floppy ears that don't work well with these things. Wally Chubbuck called these things suicide belts. We'll try that. I don't want to have to shout, because I don't really have a big booming voice like Robbie does. What's that? Okay. How we doing? Okay. I'll try not to be Pentecostal and jerk it off during my presentation. The picture that you see there is a picture of rockets out of Gaza coming into Israel in the south. It was given, the Israeli government we had a fact-finding team from Friends of Israel went over. Executive Director Jim Showers took a few people over there, supporters and others, and visited various Jewish agencies. It was not a tour. Tours aren't happening right now. And they were not far from this place. But fortunately, the Iron Dome takes out most of those, and we're grateful for that. But my title, Christian Ethics, I'm really talking about the arguing that goes on, and really the bottom line is truth-telling. There are the newspapers, whether it's overseas, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the protest marches, and all that's going on, there's somebody that's not telling the truth. Is that right? And so that's when I'm talking about Christian ethics, I'm talking about being honest in reporting. See, and here's the deal. We don't just disagree about theology with the Muslims. We do disagree with them about theology. We don't just disagree with the Arabs about that. We don't just disagree with our covenant brothers, who are true brothers, but who have a different view of what's happening in the Middle East. We disagree with our covenant brothers who blame dispensationalists like us for 9/11. We just, in a period when we're supposedly in great decline, we had great power to control George W. Bush and his policies in the Middle East. And because of the pro-Israel stance we convinced our government to have, because we're so powerful as a diminishing group of dispensationalists, they hit us out of anger in response. It's not their fault. It's our fault. And so we don't disagree with our brothers about the theology of all that, just the theology of all that. We disagree about the facts on the ground. What is actually happening? And we've disagreed with them since 1948, maybe even before. And so I just want to highlight some of those things as we go through here. And I want to give you a few quotes from different people about truth-telling. We always start with Mark Twain. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. That's good advice. George Washington, it is better to offer no excuse than a bad one. He's my favorite president, by the way. Gave up power, absolute power, twice. Good man. Napoleon Bonaparte, not quite so good a man. History is a set of lies agreed upon. Michael End, I don't have a picture, I don't even know who he is, but I love this quote, I found it. When it comes to controlling human beings, there's no better instrument than lies. Because you see, humans live by beliefs, and beliefs can be manipulated. The power to manipulate beliefs is the only thing that counts. That sounds very postmodern. Vladimir Lenin, to tell the truth is a petty bourgeois habit, whereas for us to lie is justified by our objectives. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in our country, the USSR, the lie has become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state. Yasser Arafat, why shouldn't I lie? For the sake of Palestine, I am willing to lie all the time. The Haaretz opinion piece that came out, this is before October 7th, back a few years. Benjamin Netanyahu is a certified liar. Not for nothing did Bezalel Smotrich, who is now his finance minister, call the prime minister a lying son of a liar. That's not showing a lot of respect for his dad, Benzion Netanyahu. So a lot of political opinions, and we have our own political opinions about our own political guys, as well as those overseas. Let me ask you, how many of you have ever told a lie in your life? Okay, and some of you who didn't raise your hand are lying right now. Okay.
Not me.
I believe the Chafer Conference is full of liars. The human race struggles with telling the truth. Now, how many husbands lie to their wives when the wives ask them, is my new hairdo good? Is that new dress I have, how's that look? We struggle sometimes in being truth tellers in an absolute sense. But we need to understand that truth telling is part of God's plan. He wants us to be truthful. Romans 3:4, let God be found true, though every man be found a liar. It is God's nature to be truthful. Titus 1:2, in the hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised long ages ago. He promised eternal life, promised it long ages ago, and he hasn't lied about that. He didn't even stutter about that. God cannot lie. It's his nature to tell the truth, and he wants his followers to be like him so that we grow and grow and grow, so that it becomes natural, more natural for us to tell the truth. In the law, Exodus 20:16 and Deuteronomy 5:20, and the Ten Commandments, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Leviticus 19:11, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. In the prophets, and by the way, there are a lot more passages than these few that I've chosen. Isaiah 59:4, no one sues righteously and no one pleads honestly. They trust in confusion and speak lies. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity. In Zechariah 8:16, these are the things which you should do. Speak the truth to one another, judge with truth and judgment for peace in your gates. In the writing, Psalm 34:13, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Proverbs 29:12, if a ruler pays attention to falsehood, this is an interesting one. If a ruler pays attention to falsehood, all his ministers become wicked. In the New Testament, John 8:44, you are of your father the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Colossians 3:9, do not lie to one another, since you laid aside the old self with its evil practices. Acts 5:4, the sad story of Ananias and Sapphira, you have not lied to men, but to God. And in that case, God decided to practice capital punishment for lying. Now, since all of you have lied,
We're all out of here.
and if God decided to practice capital punishment for us, the conference will be empty.
That's right.
Revelation 21:8. But for the cowardly and the unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now, by the way, that passage is not saying that since all of you have lied, all of you are going to the lake of fire. That's not what that passage is saying. The very previous verses, 6 and 7, highlight the idea that we come freely. We receive eternal life freely from God. It's a gift. And we appropriate that by faith. That's how we overcome, by faith. But what this is saying in this passage is that the people who don't have faith, the people who have never trusted in Christ by grace alone, through faith alone, in Him alone, those people have to stand before God as they are. They stand as cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, liars. So whatever they are, they stand before God that way with no cover from the Savior of the world. That's what that passage is saying. And it's a sad one. So now if I ask you, are you a liar, will you be more hesitant to tell me the truth? There are 5 different areas I'm going to run through in terms of the modern Arab-Israeli conflict, and where I think there's a good deal of lying going on. Last night, our brother Randall talked about the name Palestine, so I'm going to mention that briefly and just kind of hit up the issue of lying. I'm going to talk about stolen land. He talked about that last night too. We talk about that a lot. I'm going to deal with the oppression and the apartheid that was talked about in Paula's presentation. Holocaust denial. That's a big lie. But because I'm a theologian by training, I'm going to end up the biggest lie of all, which is theological. I'm going to talk about that and what some of the theology behind the Arab Christian nationalism that's going on. That's part of what's plaguing us at the moment. But to start with the name Palestine. Okay, we know there are 2 different views, the way it's presented to the world right now. There's the right way and the wrong way. And the right way, I have it on the left in the diagram. I should have put it on the right. Because as Jerry Falwell would just say, right is right and left is wrong. Okay. But I didn't do that. Geographical it's a geographical term, going back to the Philistines. We remember that. The Roman geographical used to separate Israel from its homeland in AD 135, Syria, Palestina. It includes Jewish people, Arabs, Druze, and others who live in the region. So anybody who lived in that geographical region could have claimed to be Palestinian. And of course, Randy gave some good presentation of various articles and quotes and things in newspapers that refer to the Jews as Palestinians. In fact, in the 1930s and 40s, you'll see more references to the Jews as Palestinians than you see Arabs as Palestinians. Then what's up with that? Now, this is an important issue. I was, after October 7th, I was in a prayer meeting at my church where I attend in the Westchester, Pennsylvania area. And there's a lady who asked, she's Christian, she's never really dealt with these issues before. Am I in trouble?
We lost our video.
I'll pause. This is me pausing. We have lost the video feed for the live stream. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I stepped on something. Maybe the devil didn't like the fact I called him a liar, quoting John 8:44. Okay, here's me continuing. Okay, includes anybody who lives there. And this lady in my Sunday school class, she asked a question. Not having dealt with this before, she said, "What is a Palestinian anyway?" Glad I was in the room. And I helped the whole group there understand that's a geographical term, and that Jews were called Palestinians in the past. But that's not what the media tells us today, right? They're telling us that Palestinian is, on the other side, an ethnic group of people. Arab is not enough to describe ethnicity for them. It eliminates Jews from consideration, so they're not part of the Palestinians. Kind of separates them from their land. And it drives a specific Arab nationalism, in my opinion, for the region. And that's really what all this is about. It drives a specific Arab nationalism for the region. And you need to understand that the Palestinian, so-called Palestinian Arabs, whether it's Fatah, PLO, Hamas, even Hezbollah, but especially Hamas, is not well liked by any of the Arab nations. And Randy mentioned Black September when the PLO were attacked, and I mean they had a civil war in Jordan in 1970, and we're very thankful that Jordan won. And they pushed the PLO out of Jordan, and they all went to Lebanon. And that's why we had the 1982 war, because Israel all of a sudden was attacked from Lebanon. So you have these two things. I think it was a highly successful PR job done by the PLO. They looked around at some of the things that were happening, and they said, if we can somehow convince the world to treat us like we're an ethnic group, we can present ourselves as an ethnic oppressed people. And maybe even get the world to think of them like they were thinking about the Zulus in South Africa under the apartheid of South Africa. They saw how that was going and how world pressure was actually helping. And I think it was all kind of a mix. Peter Jennings, you younger folks don't know that name, but you older folks probably remember Peter Jennings, ABC news reporter. He was actually a reporter in the Middle East before he went to the desk, the evening news desk. And in 1976, in fact, I have about 15 years of the Journal of Palestine Studies, done from the Arab viewpoint. And I grabbed those. They were given away at a library, so I grabbed them. Especially because I was over in 1982, I was an aerospace engineer in Israel during the first Lebanon War. I was working on F-16s and had some interesting conversations with people at that time. And it's interesting, there's an interview in one of these issues, 1976 issue. Peter Jennings says to the interviewer, "I think there is definitely an anti-Arab bias in America, and I regret it." Is there an anti-Arab bias in America right now? It's not really like it was, if he's even right about that. There's also some unfortunate stereotyping in the media. It's unfortunate, for example, to use simply the word Arab to refer to Palestinians or Iraqis or Libyans or Saudis. But you know, Arab is a pretty good ethnic designation. They're Arabs. But I think we're beginning to move away from that, although it is a slow process. So we have that issue of Palestine and the very name being converted into a political use, and frankly, that conversion to the political use is a lie. It violates Christian ethics in reporting. Second is the stolen land issue. And I appreciate Randall and others talking about that too. The Arabs look at what's happening as European colonialism. These Jews, and most of the Jews, Ashkenazi, but others have come in, but came from Europe. Herzl's project, Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, just went all throughout Europe trying to get leaders in Europe to support the idea of going to have a homeland for the Jews in what was called Palestine. And there were some other locations that were discussed, but they weren't going to fly, as we know. So the Arabs look at that as the European guys working things out and enforcing a colonialism and stealing their land. The Jews view it as going home. One of the speakers yesterday used the word home. They're just going back to their home. That, by the way, God gave them 3,000 years ago. Before that. And when they complain about that, 1948, I'm going to give an example here in a little bit. In 1948, when the Jews declared independence, what happened? How many nations attacked them? Like 7 nations attacked them. Sent forces and attacked them. And they thought, those nations thought, I mean, after all, the number of Jews was very small, the number of Arabs very big. And they were talking, the Arabs talking among themselves, the nations talking, radio broadcast. It'll take 2 or 3 days and Israel will be gone. Okay, it's 2024. Is Israel gone? No. And the Jews did not have F-16s then, or F-35s, or nuclear weapons, which they have now. And they won. They are a resilient people. And we take pride in that. We're proud of them for that. That doesn't mean they're always right. We'll talk about that as well. But the Jews are going home. Edward Said, quoted by Naim Atik. Naim Atik is the father of Christian Palestinian liberation theology. I'm going to come back to him. He says Zionism never spoke of itself unambiguously as a Jewish liberation movement, but rather as a Jewish movement for colonial settlement. Is this true? Certainly, the Jews moved to settle. No question about that. They were, by the way, settling before 1948. But you know, the whole thing was a Jewish liberation movement. What we're trying to do, we're to free the Jews from the persecution of Europe. That was in other parts of the world too, but primarily Europe. Free them from the anti-Semitism. Free them from the Nazis. The ministry I work for, the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, started in 1938, 10 years before Israel became a nation. And it was started specifically to get the Jews out of Germany. That's why it started. And then it very quickly developed a Bible teaching component, and outreach obviously goes along with that. So this is not really true that they were only doing a colonial settlement move. No, they were trying to save their lives and have a place. Now, Theodor Herzl was a bit naive. He thought if we could just have our own homeland, we wouldn't have any anti-Semitism to deal with. So we need our own homeland to defend ourselves, and then we wouldn't have well, he got part of it right. In their own homeland, they can defend themselves. But he was wrong that would be the end of anti-Semitism. It's just shifted a little bit. And so that's not quite right. And then I have a question. I throw back at them this question. There's a map. Randy had a similar map up. You see North Africa in the green. That's the spread of Islam and Arab control out through the West, which happened rather quickly, actually, if you know your Islamic history. And so when I've had some conversations with some Arab people, and they ask about that, and they say Israel needs to give back the land that they took in 1948, that they took further in 1967 in the Six-Day War. And I say, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll talk to my Jewish friends and ask them to give the land back to you. If you will give back all the land in North Africa that you took. Nobody's taken me up on that yet. See, they're not interested in, quote, being fair or truthful about those things. And I can understand if you did lose a home, like Naim Atik did. His family lost their home in 1948, but it wasn't the fault of the Jews. See, that's a lie that the Jews forced those people out. They didn't. There's Jordan and the other governments on the Arab side who asked those people to leave so that they wouldn't be in the line of fire. Then we'll clean up the Jews in 2 or 3 days, and then you can move back. Well, the problem was they didn't clean up the Jews in 2 or 3 days. And now the Arab people can't go back to those homes ever again. But the Jews have provided some remuneration to help them. Also in 48 and 1967, around 800,000 or more Jewish people were forced out of their homes by the Arabs in all the countries around, especially North Africa. And they were never remunerated for their loss of property. In fact, you go to, and I've written a book by Lynn Julia. She's a Jewish lady from London, and she has a book called Uprooted about the story of the primarily North African Jews who were uprooted, thrown out of their homes because the Arab nations were mad at 1948 and 1967. And in Egypt, several of the embassies that are there, all the governments, are wealthy homes that were Jewish. And the Jews were forced out, and now all these embassies live in these Jewish homes. No remuneration for that. So, who's telling the truth about all that? Then the category of oppression and apartheid. Left hand is Chicago, right hand is New York. We've had those in Philadelphia. Have you guys had those in Houston? It's really disconcerting. Hisham Sharabi, Journal of Palestine Studies, written in 1982. And one thing that Randall said last night that really grabbed me was that he said things haven't changed. They haven't, just names, the different players, new people, but the storyline has never changed. Still the same as it's always been, which means it's still a lie. He says this: Israel's action against the Palestinians in Lebanon, 1982, First Lebanon War, is part of a larger pattern. Remember in 1982, I know some of you are younger and weren't even around then. But in 1982, the PLO, Katyusha rockets coming in from the north. Now it's Hezbollah up there. Okay, the PLO, the remnants of PLO, are the Palestinian Authority in the West, so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. But they were in Lebanon attacking the northern cities. In fact, they have always targeted civilians. And they were targeting schools when they knew the children were coming out of school in the north part of the country. And finally, the nation, Israel, had enough of that. And then Menachem Begin was the prime minister back then, and they just lined up the tanks and soldiers, and they got the airplanes, and they just rolled up through Lebanon. And they had Beirut surrounded. All the PLO in the world were in Beirut. Just like now all of Hamas, well, most of all of Hamas, not maybe all, is in the south part of Gaza. But they had them there ready to crush them, and the U.S. stopped them from doing that. And we probably shouldn't have done that. The world would have been better off if we had not done that. But this is the war. This is the war in 1982. Same thing, attacks, not quite as brutal as the Hamas attacks, but still brutal, and they had to stop it. So this guy says Israel's action against the Palestinians in Lebanon, 1982, is part of a larger pattern, which includes the Palestinians under Israeli occupation. In Gaza and the West Bank, the Palestinians have been subjected to systematic persecution and suppression, deprived of their national and human rights. See, I don't buy any of this. Their elected leaders and intellectuals imprisoned, only if they try to blow up people, expelled, physically attacked and maimed, and their cultural institutions dismantled or destroyed. And he goes on to say, according to the Geneva Convention of 1949, genocide is defined as the systematic destruction of a society or a national or ethnic group. Okay, there he's assuming what? The Palestinians are an ethnic group, okay? That's a lie. Not only by means of mass killing, but also by the destruction of homes, the confiscation of property, the expulsion of people, and the destruction of social, political, and cultural institutions. In light of this definition, Israeli action against the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Lebanon may properly be described as genocidal. But has Israel ever tried to wipe out any people group? Never. This is a lie. You might see this on Al Jazeera and in the New York Times. He goes on to say, in this action, the United States must be regarded as Israel's accomplice, and as such, must shoulder the same guilt. You know, the United States State Department, since the very beginning of our country, has been pro-Arab. Now, remember, in the beginning, there was no such thing as Israel. But they've been very pro-Arab. And the Arabs have liked the United States until the last 50 years or so, because we were not colonial people planting our own, trying to take over a certain territory and putting an American flag there. It was England and France and others were doing that. But we weren't doing that, so the Arabs kind of liked us. And in fact, we don't become Israel's #1 military ally till after the '67 war. And then between 67 and 82, we become their best friend. And after 82, when Israel uses F-16s and F-15s and just obliterates the Syrian Air Force in 3 days. And the guys, the last day, a couple of Syrian pilots decided to fly to Iran instead of flying into the battle over Beirut. That's how bad it was. And that success on the part of Israel turned Israel in the minds of others in the world. Now they're the military bullies. And it helped feed the idea, oh yeah, we're the poor, oppressed Palestinian people. And now, because the United States was their biggest military friend, and they're using military planes built by the United States, like F-15s, F-16s. Now Israel is the little Satan, and America becomes the big Satan. I gave this a couple years ago. I think it's worth saying. In 1982, the Arab mayor, and I say you can transplant this to now, and Hamas and Gaza. You can transplant it. Their journals and their newspapers are saying the same kinds of statements. It says, no one was surprised by the criminal attack on Lebanon. Okay, they were attacked, rockets coming in, trying to kill their children, so they go up to clean them out. And what's it called? A criminal attack. What are they calling the retaliation of the IDF into Gaza? What is it? It's a criminal attack. Israel is guilty of war crimes. Okay. is a continuation of Israel's policy aimed at exterminating our people physically and politically. Was Israel trying to eliminate a people group? Or were they trying to eliminate a military group? Destroy an army? What are they trying to do now? Are they trying to kill 2 million people in Gaza? What they're trying to do is eliminate the terrorist group Hamas. And that's maybe around 20,000, there's different estimates out there, maybe 20,000 soldiers. It's a continuation of the battle started by Israel at the very beginning when it considered the land to be its land. Yeah, and I would say in their mind the beginning is 1948, the Nakba, the catastrophe, but I would say the beginning is Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 when God gives the land to Abraham and his descendants through Isaac. And he goes on to say, and sought to build a pure Israel without the inhabitants. That when he says without the inhabitants, the real true inhabitants, the true Palestinians, the Arab Palestinians. And so he's accusing Israel here, again, to destroy entirely the people. He's just saying it a different way. And so this is the kind of statement that was made about Lebanon in 1982, being made about Gaza now. If you watch carefully, they're saying exactly the same thing. Edmund Garib interviewing Peter Jennings, remember back to Peter Jennings again? He says, one can still see bias. For example, in an editorial comment on the ABC Morning News, Harry Reasoner. How many of you older folks remember Harry Reasoner? Okay, all right. Harry Reasoner, in trying to explain the actions of Israeli demonstrators against the Kissinger mission. How many of you remember Henry Kissinger, the Jewish guy? Okay, just died. Mission last August, justified them. Now these Israeli demonstrators, let's talk about demonstration. This isn't even a war thing. Harry Reasoner justified these demonstrations by saying that the Arabs started all the wars. How many of you believe the Arabs started all the wars? Okay. How many of you don't really know? Because you haven't been there. Okay. This Edmund Garib goes on to say Harry Reasoner, blamed the Arabs for starting the 1948 war, the 1956 war, the 1967 war, and the 1973 war. Okay. Now, they hadn't got to the 1982 war, and the 1987 Intifada, the 2000 Intifada, the 2006 incursion into Lebanon, and now the Gaza war. Started last October. And then he has this interesting question at the end. He said, Harry Reasoner blamed the Arabs for starting all these wars. Whose history is he reading? Well, let's study that for a second. In 1948, we already talked about that. Israel declared independence. The United Nations had given them the permission to do that. That was the universal vote of the nations of the world. They accepted it. The Arabs didn't. They declared independence, and 7 nations attacked them. Who started the war? Well, the Arabs, of course Israel did. They declared independence. It's kind of like the Americans started the Revolutionary War with Britain by declaring independence. I mean, the British didn't have to send their troops after us, did they? Same way with the Arabs. They didn't have to do that, but they did. The 1956 war. Nasser closed the Suez Canal in Egypt. And the French and the British talked to the Israelis and said, let's march our tanks, all 3 of us, together to the Suez Canal. And they started going across the Sinai with their tanks. It was the 10th time. I was 3 years old. I remember it very well. And the United States and the USSR, probably in the last time they ever agreed on anything together, stepped in and stopped them from going after Egypt. And then by negotiations, Egypt opened the Suez Canal, and it's been open ever since. But did Israel start that? Who closed the Suez Canal? Egypt, which was hurting many, many different nations. The 1967 Six-Day War. Israel had its so-called preemptive strike, where it attacked and destroyed all the around breakfast time, when the Egyptian soldiers were having breakfast. They destroyed the air force of the Egyptians on the ground in a preemptive attack. They said, well, Israel went first. No. Egypt had blockaded the Straits of Tiran, which is an act of war. Officially an act of war. And they had amassed their troops at the border. And Israel saw it coming for several days. It wasn't a secret. And they just took action to prevent them from being destroyed. Who started the war? I'd say the Egyptians started the war. And the 1973 war. Okay, that's the Yom Kippur War. They were attacked on their High Holy Day. They were totally surprised, just like with Gaza. They didn't start that war. But theirs go, yeah, you did. You started it by being Israel. That's how they think. So, and he asked the surprising, whose history is he reading? We're reading the actual accounts on the ground. There's truth at stake here. And one of the reasons we're pro-Israel is the truth of what's happening on the ground. If Israel was committing genocide, we should oppose it. But they're not. Then on September 9th, 1993, there were letters of mutual recognition. Arafat to Yitzhak Rabin. He says the PLO recognizes the right of the state of Israel to exist in peace and security. The PLO renounces the use of terrorism and other acts of violence. 4 days later, I think they had the Oslo Accords. They signed those. Okay, did he keep his word? 7 years later, you have another intifada. He's saying one thing in English to the English-speaking world. He's saying another thing in Arabic to the Arabic world. This was a lie, and this is an official letter sent to the Prime Minister of Israel. And of course, Yitzhak Rabin also wrote a letter to Arafat recognizing them. So it's interesting how that goes. That's a lie. So who is telling the truth? See, it's not simply that we disagree in our theological worldview. We're pro-Israel, and the number one reason is theological. Genesis 12:3 is still in the Bible. That's our number one reason for supporting Israel. It's theological. Why I love Israel? Theology, number one. And God tells me in Jeremiah that he loves Israel with an everlasting love. And you know what we got to do? We got to love what God loves. Okay, so we're pro-Israel. Now that we try not to be anti-Arab. Right? It'd be nice if we could be pro both of them. But since they're fighting over the same piece of real estate, that makes it very hard. And the world's not going to let us be pro-Israel and pro-Arab at the same time. The world wants to divide. So who's telling the truth? I would say it's on the Israeli side where the truth resides most often. Then Holocaust denial. There's Mahmoud Abbas, head of the Palestinian Authority. He's getting up, he's long in the tooth, so we might see there's new leadership brewing there, and who knows where that's going to take us. He was in Russia in 1982 during the First Lebanon War, and he was writing his dissertation at a Russian university. And this was his dissertation title, The Relationship Between Zionists and Nazis, 1933 to 1945. Randall alluded to this last night. This is the Anti-Defamation League's definition of Holocaust denial, and it is exactly what is argued in the dissertation of Abbas. Now, he has in recent years backed down a little bit from his statements, or at least he says he did. But if he's like Yasser Arafat, he says, I just keep on lying for my people. Okay, Holocaust denial is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory which argues that Jews around the world knowingly fabricated evidence of their own genocide during World War II in order to extract financial reparations from Germany, gain world sympathy, and facilitate the theft of Palestinian land for the creation of Israel. It is founded on the belief that Jews are able to force governments, Hollywood, the media, and academia to promote a lie at the expense of non-Jews. Holocaust denial. It's a made-up story, or at least in some versions an exaggerated story. But there is incontrovertible evidence of the Holocaust, and I am so grateful. There are some countries where Holocaust denial is against the law. You cannot deny the Holocaust in Poland or Germany. It's against the law. And some others. I have a picture there. Anybody have good German? Can you read the sign? Work will make you free. That's Auschwitz. Picture the entryway into Auschwitz. Auschwitz and other death camp remnants. They're there. They exist. We see the evidence. Some of the gas chambers are still there. Some of the ovens where they burned the bodies are still there. And I'm so glad that the Polish government preserved these things to the level that they could. I once read a book in my PhD studies in one of my classes by a guy named Theodore Borowski. He was a Polish poet who wrote a lot of short stories. And the little book that I had was a collection of short stories, and the first one, which gave the title to the collection, was This Way to the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen. And in the short story, it's autobiographical. He was imprisoned as a Gentile at Auschwitz. His girlfriend was at Birkenau, 2 miles away, the other half of the Auschwitz II. And he was strong. And so they used him as labor. Most of the people that got off the trains went straight to the death camp, right to the death zone, to the gas chambers and the ovens. Only the strong made it in. And he was an agitator. He had gotten caught, and he was an agitator, but he was strong. And one of his jobs with a few other guys, a couple of other guys were Jewish. They would unload the belongings that all these people had. The people get off the train, and then they'd send them, tell them they're going to delouse them and go kill them. But all their luggage would be thrown on this ramp, and his job was to go through all the luggage, pull out any food or nice things, and nice things would go to the soldiers, the Nazis, and the food they could divide up among themselves. And he survived largely because he had extra food. After the war, in the 1950s, he had an apartment in Warsaw. And I don't know all the ins and outs of his life, but he decided to turn on the gas and kill himself. It's a horrible thing that happened. And the evidence is there. Yad Vashem, if you ever go, how many of you have been to Israel? Most of you? A lot of you? Make sure you go to Yad Vashem, where that's the official collection of evidence for the Holocaust. It's still there. The Nuremberg Repository. I learned I have an aunt, she's died a couple years ago, she's with the Lord. She was an 18-year-old secretary for one of the American lawyers. She was German. She was the secretary of one of the American lawyers at the Nuremberg trials. And there are stacks and stacks and stacks. If you think ancient Near Eastern literature is big, the Nuremberg repository is huge. The amount of information and testimonials and evidence of what happened in Nazi Germany. And then we have Holocaust survivors that are still alive. I had lunch with one back about 5 years or so ago in Vichy, France. She had come to Christ through the efforts of Friends of Israel missionaries in Vichy, France. And I attended a synagogue service where she was there. She was upstairs with the ladies. It was an Orthodox seminary, and the men were downstairs. I was with them. Afterwards, we went to lunch together. And interestingly, she had developed Alzheimer's, and she forgot that she had gotten saved. I'm so grateful for the doctrine of eternal security. God knows those there is. And she trusted the Lord. Holocaust survivor. She was a young child on the train on the way to Auschwitz. They opened the door and they held her out, and some brave person grabbed her and ran.
Wow.
And of course the soldiers would shoot people like that easily. But he got away with her.
Wow.
And she survived. There are Holocaust survivors still alive as evidence, but they won't be with us much longer. And then the ghettos, they talked about the walls this morning. I've seen those. The diary of Joseph Goebbels, or Goebbels. You know, the German pronunciation is not something I'm capable of. Yeah. So some of his diary from World War II, he was the propaganda minister for Hitler. And some of his diary survived. 1941 to 43, I think, somewhere in there. And I got a copy and I read it. Felt like I had to take a couple of extra showers after I read it. The idea of hating the Jews enough to kill them all is obvious. It's not something that is made up by some cabal out there for political reasons. These people truly hated the Jews. And many of the people today hate the Jews, and we need to be sure that we don't take that lightly and take it seriously as legitimate hate and respond accordingly. Some Israeli Jews who are anti-Zionist and do not reject the existence of the Holocaust nonetheless use the image of the Holocaust to describe what is happening to non-Israelis in the nation of Israel. Dr. Israel Shahak. I would say the only human response to the Holocaust is to try not to be like Nazis in word or in deed. I certainly agree with that. What brought the Holocaust was the racist attitude toward Jews, the division of German society into Jews and non-Jews on the grounds of race. This is exactly the same thing that is happening in Israel. Only it's not Jews and it's not quite the same. It's not Germans. You know, Jews in Germany and non-Jews in Germany. It's Jews in Israel and non-Jews in Israel. Who is telling the truth? There are almost 1 million, maybe more, Arabs who are citizens in the state of Israel. And they, for the most part, have not risen up, like Hamas thought they would, to attack Israel. And some of them serve in the IDF. Israel is their country. Well, I'm a minority. I'm from the South. And I still love America. They say it's our country. Now the last one, theology. For most Palestinian Christians, as for many other Arab Christians, their view of the Bible, especially the Hebrew Scriptures or Old Testament, has been adversely affected by the creation of the state of Israel. This is a statement by Naim Atik in his book, Justice and Only Justice, A Palestinian Theology of Liberation. So what he's saying, their view of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, has been adversely affected by the creation of the state of Israel. So my view is affected by whether Israel becomes a nation or not. He goes on to say, before the creation of the state, the Old Testament was considered to be an essential part of Christian scripture, pointing and witnessing to Jesus. Since the creation of the state, some Jewish and Christian interpreters have read the Old Testament largely as a Zionist text, to such an extent that it has become repugnant to Palestinian Christians. Now, when he says some Jewish and Christian interpreters have read the Old Testament largely as a Zionist text, he's talking about us. We're in there. And that's repugnant to Palestinian Christians. Then he says, as a result, the Old Testament has generally fallen into disuse among both clergy and laity, and the church has been unable to come to terms with its ambiguities, questions, and paradoxes, especially with its direct application to the 20th century events in Palestine. So because the Old Testament has been interpreted by Zionists like you and me to see a future for national Israel, that's the point, it has become unpopular. We have made the Old Testament unpopular with the Palestinian Christians. And so they have stopped using the Old Testament. And this is really interesting to me. He goes on to say Palestinian Christians are looking for a hermeneutic that will help them to identify the authentic Word of God in the Bible and to discern the true meaning of those biblical texts that Jewish, Zionist, and Christian fundamentalists cite. There's us. You catch us there? We're the Christian fundamentalists. Cite to substantiate their subjective claims and prejudices. This is a theological lie. This is an exegetical lie. This is a hermeneutical lie. This is lying written large. Looking for a hermeneutic? Some questions for this approach. Number one, why is your hermeneutic dependent upon political outcomes? Why don't you just read the text and go where it goes? See, we're reading it in a grammatical, historical sense, literal sense. They're reading it because they want a certain outcome ahead of time. That's not the way you handle Scripture. Why is the meaning of the text not determined by the actual text? Try that out. Why is the Hebrew or Jewish nature of the Bible such a hindrance? We do realize, with the possible exception of Luke, the Bible's a Jewish book. And it's got a Jewish flavor. And we're okay with that. But they are not. Is the Bible primarily about political deliverance? Because they're not talking about getting people saved, individuals saved. They're talking about the political deliverance of an Arab national state. And they want a Bible that helps them talk about that. Who is telling the truth about how to interpret the Bible? Well, we need to be fair and balanced, right? Can we come up with examples where the modern state of Israel has done wrong? Sure, we can. But they're not the things that these other folks are talking about. For example, in the Six-Day War in 1967, on June 8th, the USS Liberty, an American ship, was attacked from aircraft and torpedo boats. 34 American sailors were killed, 171 wounded, and the attackers were the Israelis. It was a mistake. The ship was in international waters, but close to the line to Egypt, and the Israelis mistook it, even though supposedly it had an American flag flying. They mistook it as an Egyptian. And they're a little distrustful of Egyptians maybe flying an American flag on purpose for deception. After the investigation, Israel owned up to it. And even in the recent Gaza episodes, there's been a couple times when Israel said, yeah, we messed up there. Have you ever heard Hamas say we messed up there? Ask yourself, who's telling the truth? Whoever refuses to say they ever did wrong are probably not telling the truth. And I would say, and there are others that we could come up with. In fact, a book 20 years ago by Alan Dershowitz, the liberal Jewish lawyer, Case for Israel, he gives some examples of how he thinks Israel's government has made mistakes over the last, the 20 years before he wrote the book. And I've tried to address that politically and done better, perhaps. So we can come up with our examples where the modern state of Israel has done wrong. And so our view is not that Israel is always right and Israel always tells the truth. Because after all, how can I say that Israel always tells the truth when I've just discovered nobody here does? Right? We all lie. Okay, we all struggle. The final analysis is when it comes to reporting all these things, it comes to us reading the reports of all these things, we need to be fair and balanced, open minds. But I have to be honest with you. I have a hermeneutical suspicion when I'm reading Al Jazeera. And I'm going to trust what I hear coming from Israel more. So we must be truth tellers. Okay. I guess it's time for any questions.
I have a comment, sir.
Okay.
Hold on just a second. In regard to the ship that you just addressed, it is my understanding from solid information that that ship was deliberately sunk by the Israelis because the Americans were furnishing information to Israel's enemies that was putting Israel in danger. And they did that in an act of self-defense. But to keep friends with America, they said it was an accident. But it was a self-defense move by Israel.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. I do know that Israel paid millions of dollars in reparations to the families of those sailors.
That was cheap. They had to do it.
What would you say to those who would say that Israel has indeed committed genocide, but you've got to go back further to the beginning when they overtook the land? How would you answer that?
Okay, well, number one, the idea that Israel just as a colonial move as a group just invaded the land and took it over, that's a false narrative. Most of the land in Israel was bought by Jewish people when the Turks controlled the land during the Ottoman Empire. They bought the land. And so there's a lot of Israeli land there already. So it's not entirely true to say that they. So I would push them back on that.
I'm referring to Genesis.
Oh, you're going back to the Genesis account. Okay, yeah, restate it.
I'm just referring to someone who would accuse, who would take issue with what you said, that Israel has never committed genocide by going back to Genesis when they first took the land in
and
the time of
eliminated
the
the
patriarchs.
Canaanites.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking about modern times in that statement. I wasn't really addressing the past. And of course, we have some sticky wickets theologically there, ethically, killing all the Amalekites, etc., all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But then again, one of my responses to all of that is that the God who ordered that, okay, and God ordered it. He knows the end from the beginning. And this came home to me. I was watching a clip probably 2 years after 9/11. It was a clip of our number one enemy. What was his name? Osama bin Laden, not President Obama. Okay. Osama bin Laden. I saw a clip of him. He was kneeling. He was firing his machine gun. It was a PR clip for them. And had one of his sons, about 12 years old, standing beside him. And the thought occurred to me, where's that boy going to be in 10 years? And what's he going to be doing? And so it didn't bother me that we were trying to kill him and his family. And we were, because they were all in the mountains there, and they were trying to get him. That's where they were. And so, part of me that doesn't like that, but on the other hand, I know God knows from the beginning and the end. And I just trust that process there, and I trust the Lord. If he says wipe out the Amalekites, there's a reason for that. God uses people to judge other people. He used Babylon, a more wicked nation, to judge Judah. He could use a more wicked China to judge a less wicked America. I mean, God could do all kinds of things in how he sets that up. So I would try to frame it in that larger discussion.
I think it also helps to bring out the omniscience of God and the omnipotence of God. That's what we're trusting. He knows all the facts, and we don't. So, as Abraham said, shall not the judge of all the earth do what's right? And he can judge because he knows all the facts.
Yep.
I agree that there is most certainly being like a narrative spun, like Israel is not causing all of the wars over there. But do you believe that Israel is capable of, for instance, causing a genocide or causing a war? Do you believe that they are presently capable of doing that?
Okay, if you're asking me, are human beings capable of that? I don't think they're more capable than other humans. I think Americans are capable of that. I think human beings in general are. So we all have sin crouching at the door. And so we have to be ever watchful of that. But so far, the Israelis have not showed an inclination to do that. They've been portrayed as trying to take over the world. The protocols of the Elders of Zion. I haven't noticed them running their tanks all the way to Moscow or all the way to Mecca. I don't see them trying to do that.
Question about the the Palestinian Christians. Is anybody reaching out to them, giving them a view of dispensationalism? Have any of them said,
well, our
changed my
churches,
view?
we have some church plants. Friends of Israel has some church plants in Israel, and they do spend some time trying to develop relationships and do joint events with Christian Arabs, churches that are Arabic. And so they do spend that time, and some of them are replacement theology churches. And they'll have youth group things together, swap teachers, whatever, but our folks draw the line. You're not going to teach our kids replacement theology. Okay, so they are trying to develop those relationships with churches, so with true Christians. Now, the other Arabs are most likely Muslim. And evangelism is just a natural thing for evangelical Christians, or at least it should be, to do, although our churches are focusing primarily on reaching Jewish people for Christ.
And the term Christian Palestinians is a very broad term that lacks specificity because you have a broad spectrum. Okay, so you have to be very careful because many of them are Roman Catholic, or they're maybe Greek Orthodox, or they're or they have been influenced or hold to a replacement theology, or it's just a superficial label. that I'm a Christian because I'm not a Muslim. So you have to be very careful how you define the term. Don't read the word Christian in a news report as if it's somebody who believes what you believe.
Yeah, don't read them as if they were a covenant theologian in America, because most of them probably aren't covenant at all. The Christian Arabs in the nation of Israel or in the Palestinian Authority are probably not at all following covenant theology per se.
I wonder if you could spend just a few minutes addressing the situation in Gaza. I'm interested in your thoughts on what should be done about the hostage situation. What do you think Israel should do about eradicating Hamas, or stated objective of doing that? And what do you think they will actually wind up doing in Gaza? How do you think that's going to end?
He wants you to do free reign speculation.
Okay. I need to call the State Department and sign up to get paid for that kind of comment. Yeah.
We know more than I did.
Well, what they're going to do, I hope they won't do what we made them do in 1982. We made them not destroy the PLO. And I remember Stroganov, he was a sergeant that I was working with in the computer lab, and the soldiers were complaining in the lab, and I said to him, why do you care what we think? Why don't you just go do what you think is right? And I'll never forget his answer. He looked at me and says, you Americans are the only friends we have. That's the way he said it. And so, I'm worried about American lagging support for Israel. I think they ought to just keep going until they destroy them. Now, getting hostages out, if they could do a ceasefire and could guarantee getting the hostages out. The problem are the tunnels. This war would have been over in days like the past wars if it hadn't been for the tunnels. I mean, how many miles of tunnels? There's hundreds of miles of tunnels. And they spent the money to do those tunnels was relief funds that was given to Gaza beginning in 2006 or 7 when Hamas took over, and it's just been using it for those things and not trying to help people. So I hope Israel will eliminate Hamas. And by that, I don't mean the 2 million Arabs living in Gaza, but the Hamas army, the 20,000 terrorists. Now, the people voted for Hamas, so they bear a brunt of responsibility, but some of them may be out of fear. So I don't want to make value judgments about each family and how they did things. But the soldiers, the terrorists, they need to be destroyed. And I hope Israel will finish that. But I don't know of a way out relative to the hostages. I mean, they can't flood the tunnels because the hostages might be down there. So that means it's a painstaking thing. So if they can come up with some deal, I think it needs to be something brokered by someone other than the United States. Because frankly, I'm not in a trustworthy mood right now relative to the United States government about those things.
Recent national polling data indicates that 82% of U.S. voters support Israel, and 78% agree that Hamas must be removed from power, and 67%, 2/3 of American voters, believe a ceasefire should only happen after Hamas is gone and the hostages are free.
Yeah.
So the U.S. is very strongly in support of doing away with Hamas.
The people,
The
but not the government.
Not the government. That's right.
I'm the government. I'm a little wishy-washy.
You think?
Yeah, that's a theological term from the state of Alabama. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that there are Christians in that region, Arabic Christians, who are dispensational. Many of them are coming out to study at a Bible college that our mission has in that region, meeting in Alexandria, Egypt, Alexandria, Jordan, and Beirut. There are stories of those men and women coming out of Syria, Saudi Arabia to study for the gospel is heartrending. There are people there who are truly born again, and truly biblically informed. And so I think that there is hope for the Arabic people as well as the Jewish people there in that area.
Yeah. There are a lot of Muslims worldwide that are coming to Christ these days. So we can have hope.
First, it blows my mind with the amount of Holocaust denial. It makes no sense whatsoever. But I see it all over the place, and it's been cross-cultural. I think of like Black Hebrew Israelites really denying it, and other religious organizations and things like that. Do you believe it originated with an Arab sense, or is there another idea that you have historically to Holocaust denial?
I tend to think it was originated by Arabs. Al-Husseini, who's kind of the father figure of Arab Palestinian nationalism. He spent a good chunk of World War II with Hitler. We have pictures of him at some of the death camps visiting. He was figuring out from Hitler how to do that when he got back to, and in control. The British had kicked him out. When he got back in control in Palestine, he was going to try to exterminate the Jews following Hitler's pattern. And I think after the Holocaust happened, but unfortunately for him, the wrong guys won the war. But good for the Jews and good for the world. We simply have the opportunity now on their side to try to turn the tables around, and that's what they've been doing. And gradually, sometimes it's absolute denial, sometimes it's a qualified denial, sometimes there are different levels of this. But if if the number one thing you wanted, which was the extermination of Jews in Palestine, that was what Al-Husseini wanted. He wanted that, and he couldn't get it. So what do? You start crying loudly to try to change the narrative. And I think I think Holocaust denial probably came out of that. That's my best guess. But I'm not a scholar on the Middle East, I have to be honest with you. I'm a systematic theologian based on the Bible.
One more question. Okay, Ron.
At the risk of revealing my age, in 1973 in college I took a class called History, and they had us read a book called The Newsmakers. And I was shocked at how much fake news there was, especially in the American news media. But it seemed like it keeps going, and my question is this. To me, it seems like nothing's really changed, but today, it's got a lot more of a religious and international ethnic bent to it. And my question, do you kind of see that? I mean, I'm not an authority on this area at all, but that's just what I've observed, but I want your opinion on it.
Yeah, I think so. I think the PLO were very successful at their PR push to treat themselves like an ethnic group and a religious group that's being attacked by these Jewish people. And so I think they've had a very successful thing that started in the 1960s with the establishment of the PLO, and then it began to crescendo in the 70s, and I think it's probably right. That's changed. It changed in the 70s.
All right, well, thank you, Mike.